Dialed In Angling podcast presented by OnX Fish and Runnings. Well, here we are, first part of November. It's hard to believe that September and October went by like a blink of an eye. They always do. The fall time period for me is just like it flashes forward. I don't know, it's like a time warp almost. Here we are, the first part of November. Halloween's behind us. We got prime rut. We've got a full moon right now this week. There's so much to do, so much to talk about. I want to talk hunting. I want to talk a little bit fishing, some fishing experiences that I've done this week. We've had really good weather this past week. I mean, we had a few windy days, but overall, I mean, temperatures have been sort of up in the 50s. It looks like a big change coming towards this weekend. We're going to dip down into maybe the teens, 20s or 30s for highs. So we're going to start talking about making ice here shortly. So if there's any fishing trips that you want to get on your fall calendar before it's all over, before ice hits, this week's probably going to be the week to do it over the next week, week and a half here. Otherwise, things are going to start icing up. I saw some reports and I saw some pictures from Red Lake this last week, just a couple days ago, where there was skim ice on Red Lake in some of the harbors. I saw some people posting pictures of them holding ice up, towards the camera, so ice is coming. It's going to come quicker than we think. It, always does. It always seems like you're sitting on a deer stand staring at trees for a week or so, and then boom, all of a sudden you're right into ice fishing. I love this time of year because I love trying to accomplish everything I want to get done. This week, for example, I've done a ton of grouse hunting. Actually sat out my bow stand a few nights. Lots of does and fawns, lots of activities, some smaller bucks. I haven't seen my target buck yet, but I did get a chance to sit in a tree stand. It's really nice because up until last week, I was still out in the boat. I was out every day. I was still guiding. And so it's nice to be able to kind of put the boat away. I turned that in. I did get out my small boat. I was able to get out to do a little crappie fishing. I want to touch on that in this podcast because the crappies are on fire right now. I also want to talk a little bit about walleye fishing on Mille Lacs, doing some night trolling. Night trolling is open to the public now on Mille Lacs, which is great. That bite is on fire. I'm seeing a lot of people that have been out there this week, some close friends of mine that have not only been catching them at night, but they've been doing really good during the day, jig fishing. Winnebagosh has been the same way. Leech Lake has been the same way. Lake of the Woods is starting to fire, the Rainy River. So, man, I know there's a lot of people out there that don't deer hunt. This is going to be a prime weekend. It's going to be a little chilly, especially Saturday, Sunday. But as you get into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, it seems like it warms up a little bit. So if you've got these fishing trips that you want to do before ice up, this is the week to do it. This week and next week after that. I don't know, the long-term forecast, it looks like after the second week in November, it's going to turn a hard corner. It looks like temps aren't going to get above freezing. We're going to have a lot of nighttime lows in the teens. Me personally, as a person who loves ice fishing, for Dialed In Angling's sake, if you're a ice fishing fanatic like myself, I need that. I like to see when we get ice by Thanksgiving. I don't know if we're going to have it this year, maybe in far reaches of northern Minnesota, North Dakota. But if you kind of look at that long-term forecast, we may not have it for Thanksgiving. But by the time the St. Paul Ice Show hits, I certainly would think in northern Minnesota, where I live, and north, you should have plenty of ice by then. So keep your fingers crossed if you're an ice enthusiast on that. I know my Facebook feed has been filled with several different anglers that have been looking for ice up in the mountains. I saw some guys were in Montana chasing ice, chasing fish. Didn't look like they had a ton of success fishing, but it was really hard to tell from their post. Just interesting that people are already starting to chase ice. For me personally, I feel like I'm a few weeks away from that. However, there are some bites that I'm going to do over the next few weeks that I'm sort of scratching that itch. And one of the bites in particular, I'm going to wait to talk about it till the end of the podcast, but that's getting out fishing with Marcus Quam out in South Dakota. Marcus is a regular contributor to the Dialed In Angling podcast, but also the Dialed In Angling show. He's a great angler. He's become a really good friend of mine. And I keep in touch with Marcus all season long, seeing how his guide season's going, how his tournaments were. We've checked in with him, a couple times throughout the year. If you tune into this podcast regularly, I'm going to go out with Marcus. We'll have in detail kind of, how the fishing trip went. We might even do a little filming, maybe put some posts on Facebook. Not sure yet. No plans other than he's been dangling this carrot of giant walleyes in front of me and our listeners to the podcast all season long about these megas that he's been catching. If you listen back to the podcast where I was out ice fishing with Marcus, I know him and I talked about it off air, but then we also talked about it on the podcast, how he catches these 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-pound walleyes this time of year when the surface temperatures plummet in the fall on these locations. I don't want to give up his locations right now, but just telling you right now, he's on monsters and he's giving me the green light and the thumbs up that things are changing out there. I've seen a few other posts from other anglers on Facebook. I saw some on Instagram where anglers were out there doing the same thing in South Dakota, catching a few giants. It didn't sound like at that time when other anglers were posting that they were getting big numbers of fish, but they definitely were catching some big fish. And that's what I'm interested in. There's certain destinations that I want to go and just whale on fish, right? There's certain lakes around my area where I can go whale on crappies, but I'm not looking for size. And then there's other lakes where I'm looking for size of crappies, right? This trip is along those same lines. There's places where I want to go whale on walleyes and just catch a ton, maybe have a few for a fish fry, or just have a good time setting the hook and putting fish in the boat. And then there's other days when I'm either guiding or fishing on my own where I'm strictly looking for giants. And I'm only interested in big fish. And it's sort of a fun game. I know other anglers do the same thing. Now with forward-facing sonar, a lot of anglers have fine-tuned that, including myself, where, hey, there's opportunities where you see big fish, you want to target them. I've done it with crappies, bluegills, walleyes, pike. I love doing that. And it's not always my game. I'm not, I know certain anglers that's all they want to do is target big fish. They don't care about small fish. They want to target big smallmouth bass, big largemouth bass, big walleyes. They're into big fish. Me, there's times where I kind of go back and forth. I certainly can have just as fun a time on a lake where I figure it out and it's just sort of what I would classify like a fish fire lake, a lake where you could go harvest a few fish and not have to worry about ruining a resource or something. I know there's some crappie lakes in northern Minnesota that are absolutely chock full of crappies where you can go out and you can go catch some fish for a fish fry, or if you want to put a few in your freezer. Those are the type of lakes that I like to target when I'm in those moods. Now, other lakes where I'm specifically looking for trophies, I typically catch and release. I don't need to put fish on my wall. Certain anglers, that's what they want to do. They want one, they're targeting a big fish for their wall. Yeah, I always tell people I get to fish every single day, so I don't have to look at them when I come home. But that's just me personally. I'm not frowning upon people that are putting fish on their wall. Certainly, if that's what you like doing, more power to you. I'm just stating the case for when I go target big fish, I just want to catch them and release them. I don't care about keeping them. And so getting out there with Marcus, him and I are like-minded in the sense where I think him and I get in those modes equally where we want to catch big fish. And this destination that we're going to, I'm super pumped about. Him and I have talked in length about it, not just on this podcast, but off air as well, talking how cool it would be to get out there and fish together. And so I'm going to jump in the boat with him. We're going to use his gear. I'll bring a few rods out there. Sounds like it's a mixed bag of casting and maybe some trolling. So I'm excited about that. That's another topic that maybe is for another day, but I kind of like that mix of fishing as well, not just getting roped in. It's easy nowadays with forward-facing sonar to just get roped into just casting and pitching at fish all the time. Whereas I've learned with forward-facing sonar, sometimes there are scenarios where you still have to go back to those trolling techniques, but you're using forward-facing sonar to find those fish, not only in locations, but to target those fish at the depth in which they're at. And so forward-facing sonar is still a useful tool in that sense. But instead of just pitching to those fish all the time, now you're trolling baits through them, triggering reactionary strikes and going back to what you were doing before. And I really like that mix. I just had a phone conversation today with a buddy of mine where we talked about that. Sometimes it's nice not to just go with forward-facing sonar and just hunt down fish and cast on them all the time, because there are times where maybe they don't want what you're throwing at them, or they're extremely spooky, or they want to hit a crankbait on a board, or they like a trolling technique like a spinner or a bottom bouncer, and that's what they're feeding on, right? That's what they want. And so you got to give them what they want. And it's nice to be able to mix it up as an angler. There's so many times a year where throughout the summer, I'm throwing bobbers, I'm throwing jigs, I'm throwing jig wraps, jerk baits and casting and doing that stuff, but then mixing it up with doing some trolling as well. And that's fun. It makes for a really fun day. It makes for a well-rounded fishing trip. And I always say, I don't care how we catch them as long as we catch them. And so not locking yourself into certain categories of how you're going to fish, but how you're going to fish once you find the fish in that, if that makes sense to you. So I do that all the time. I talk a lot in seminars and with people in my boat where I don't lock myself into a particular presentation of how I'm going to fish that day. I'd never start out the day saying, okay, this is how we're going to fish. I might have an idea based on how I fished the day before or the last time I was on that body of water, but that might quickly change based on how I'm seeing the fish on my forward-facing sonar, on my 2D sonar, how they're setting up on side imaging, and really weather conditions. And in the fall, like we're in right now, conditions can change throughout the day. It seems like this time of year, if you're fishing or if you're going out fishing, you notice in the mornings, you start a little bit later on most days because it takes a little bit for that surface temperature to warm up. Once you start fishing, the way you're fishing and the speed at which you're fishing will change throughout the day as you get towards the evening, especially on days like today. Right now, as I'm recording this podcast, it's bright sunshine. It started out really cold this morning, but it's warming up quickly to the upper 40s, almost lower 50s. This is a prime day in which you'd start slow in the morning. You wouldn't get out at the crack of dawn. You'd meet your buddy if you're going fishing. You'd go have breakfast at a cafe, take your sweet time getting out there, let it warm up a little bit, but then maybe hit the water about 10 o'clock, even get in some grouse hunting, like I was saying earlier, do a little grouse hunting in the morning, and then get out fishing maybe 10, 11 o'clock, even noon, fish till dark. And it's sort of this ramp up or this bell curve, if you will. As you get towards evening, those fish start to bite more and more and more and more. And you see this bite window that just gets to be on fire. And with a full moon like we're experiencing now, can continue well into the evening. And so the way you're fishing might change throughout the day. Like prime example, I might start in the morning, jigging minnow, slowly just dragging it on the bottom, maybe even using fatheads. A lot of times this time of year, it's hard to find shiners or any sort of bigger minnows. And fatheads are just fine. When you get into this time of year, they want a little bit smaller profile bait, not using a heavy jig head or like a 1/4 ounce or heavier where I'm really snapping it. I'm using, let's say, an 1/8 ounce jig in 12 to, let's say, 8 to 12 feet of water. I'm throwing that minnow out there. I'm dragging it on the bottom. I'm seeing how the fish react to the bait. But then as we get towards the afternoon, I might start snap jigging a plastic. I could switch to a jigging wrap or a ripping wrap. I'm not sure, but that's that sort of that progression, even a jerk bait and letting it suspend in the water for a long period of time. But as you get towards the afternoon, those fish start to get more aggressive. And right at that prime evening bite, you can snap a little bit faster. The fish are a lot more aggressive right into that evening trolling bite, if you will. So that's kind of my mindset this time of year. Again, I'm sort of all over the map because my mind, I might wake up in the morning and say, you know what, it's cold out. I'm going to go grouse hunting. Or maybe, hey, it's going to be sun in the morning, no wind. I'm going to fish for a while in the morning and then go sit on my boat stand in the evening. And that's the beautiful part about that this time of year is having your options open and getting excited about, being able to do everything you love. And that's what I love about this time of year. That's why the title of this is So Much to Do, So Little Time. Hey, I'm going to take a quick break because I want to get into some crappie fishing I did this week. I also want to give some full fishing reports on Lake Mille Lacs, Lake Winnebagosh, even Leech Lake falls into that category. I talked to my buddies that were up on Lake of the Woods, and they did pretty well on the river as well. So I want to get into some fishing reports, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about ice fishing, and then I'll dive into kind of my thoughts and how we're going to fish in South Dakota. When we come back, we'll have more dialed in angling coming your way. OnX Fish is the best tool I have ever used for finding new lakes to target. Quickly filter lakes by species, then select trophy potential, high abundance, keeper potential, or high stocking effort to find the fish you're after in the size and the numbers you are trying to catch. Download from the App Store today to get research tools for the serious anglers and beginners alike, giving you the data to target the right lakes and the confidence to get there. Use tools like recent imagery, fishing hotspot data, or the best-in-class weather features that call out current wind, weather, barometer, moon phase, majors and minors, along with precip and more. OnX Fish is a phenomenal tool both on and off the water for discovering new fishing opportunities, many of which you'd never known existed. Download OnX Fish Midwest today, the app that is changing the game on ice and open water. Welcome back. Let's get into the fishing reports. My Facebook feed, social media feeds, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, whatever, are being, I'm kind of torn. This time of year, I'm sort of torn in three directions. You get torn in the open water direction, where on nice days like today, you want to be on the water, taking advantage of crappie bites, walleye bites, muskie bites, whatever you're into. I also get torn in the sense where the bucks are starting to go into rut. I've had a lot of activity on my trail cameras. I've been doing a little bow hunting the last few nights, tons of deer moving. So that gets me fired up, especially if I see big deer on my trail camera. It's like, I tell people, it's like a tractor beam. It just sucks me right in and I get locked into that. So then I can't stop thinking about that. But then also I want to be out with my dog and doing some hunting with my dog. I love bird hunting. I love putting up grouse. The grouse have been great. I've had, I wouldn't say great numbers, but I've had decent outings. Every time I go, I put up some birds. I've been able to harvest a few birds. Did a little pheasant hunting out in South Dakota a few weeks ago. So I want to do more of that. I know when I hit South Dakota with Marcus, he not only promised me big walleyes, but he also promised me some pheasant hunting. So I'm going to take him up on that because I love taking advantage of that. And then, of course, you've got fishing, you've got open water fishing, and you've got ice fishing. My social media feeds, I'm amazed, but yes, there are already people out searching for ice, and I'm not quite in that category yet. But yes, when I'm sitting in my deer stand, I'm certainly looking at and interested in what they're doing. There's groups, like I said earlier in the podcast, are out in Montana fishing already. I saw some other groups were posting some stuff up in the mountains, looked like up in Canada, and just interesting, intriguing. I'm always locked into the weather this time of year. I'm always looking at the weather. As an angler and a guide, I'm looking at the weather all year, right? That's like one of the first things I do in the morning. I get up in the morning, I hit start on the coffee pot, and then I look at weather. And this time of year is no different. I kind of determine my day based on the weather, which is nice. I work for a lot of the year, I guiding, doing dialed and angling. For most of the year, I'm working 7 days a week a lot of times. So when I get into this time of year, I love the fact that I'm free as a bird, other than my wife's got at me doing some honey-do lists. There's projects I want to get done around the house. So I try to work those around my hunting and fishing schedule. So that brings me into my fishing reports. Let's talk a little bit about fishing reports. You're going to want to stay tuned to the Dialed In Angling podcast all season long, especially as we get towards winter. I'm going to have a lot of guests talking fishing reports, talking ice conditions as we get towards ice. I'm going to have some guests on like Brian Beath Sather from Lake of the Woods. I've talked to some of my other buddies, Pat McSherry, Marcus Quam, a lot of contributors to Dialed In Angling from the past. You're going to be able to listen to on the podcast this year. We want to dive straight into fishing reports. We want to get ice conditions from the people that are there on the scene. And so we can keep you up to date all season long, regardless of the destinations you're going. So let's start a little bit about fishing trips that I've done this week. When I get into fall, because I have such short time windows in which I can fish, I typically don't go on big fishing trips all over. I try to stay close to home. So I'll try to fish Mille Lacs. I'll try to fish Winnie. I'll crappie fish around home here. I might do some fishing with my Uncle Gary, my dad. But I stay relatively close to home, somewhere where I can drive, fish for, a day or half a day and then be home. Other times, I brought my dog with sometimes where I've fished grouse hunted in the morning, dumped my boat in the afternoon and then drove home. All those destinations are great. I always base it on weather. And so this time of year, when you get into November, I want to fish when it's 50 degrees, upper 40s. The sun is shining. The sun still has a lot of power this time of year and can heat up that water, and the fish relate to it. The fish start biting. They're putting the feed bag on. Let's start with crappie fishing, because I've been out crappie fishing this week. What I've noticed is a rapid shift over the last 2 weeks. Last week I didn't talk a ton of fishing because we delved right into, new product with Chris Britton. We talked a lot about muskie fishing and that sort of thing. But being out crappie fishing this week, surface temps are down in the upper 40s right now to mid 40s. And so those fish have slid. They have pulled off those weed lines. Those crappies are staging. They're on the edge of wintering basins. Some are even out in the deeper wintering basins. There's been a lot of lakes that have already turned over at this point. And so if you have a lake close to you, or a lake you like fishing, a lake that you maybe want to hit up during deer season. I know in the past when we've deer hunted, it was super nice out. So we deer hunted in the morning, we fished for a couple hours, and then we got back on our stands in the evening. Maybe there's a lake close to your deer camp that you can dump a little boat in. I've got a little 14-foot boat that I use this time of year. It's actually my son's boat, but we share it. Obviously, we fish a lot together. So I take the little 14-foot boat out. You don't necessarily need forward-facing sonar, but I do have a forward-facing sonar ice bundle that we use on the boat. You can use 2D sonar too and a map chip, but get out to the edge of these wintering basins, and these crappies are loaded up. Now, what I've noticed this week is it's less of a casting with plastics and moving your bait, and more of a jig wrap, holding it still, something that you can get down there quickly, a small rip and wrap, a jig wrap. If you are using a jig and plastic, I would definitely drop that thing down and hold it more still, more like horizontal style fishing than jigging and dragging or trolling like I was doing a couple of weeks ago. And the fish are biting. The crappies are biting like crazy. They're putting the feed bag on just like the walleyes and the bass and the muskies and the pike. And so I had a fun few outings. I'm going to try to get out one more time this week before deer season. It looks like I said, Saturday and Sunday, the temps are going to drop off pretty dramatically. So I doubt we're going to get out fishing this weekend. But it was nice to get in a little crappie fishing this week and sort of scratch that itch. I'm in the process of making sure all the batteries are charged and put them away, or at least I keep my one battery pretty charged with like a battery tender on it so that I can still take the boat out over the next few weeks if we get a nice day. But as we get towards Minnesota rifle season, it's sort of putting an end to my fishing on open water, sad to say, even though I'd like to probably get out of Mille Lacs one more time. I'd love to get up to Winnie or even Leech. It's probably not going to happen for me. So, I'm sort of living vicariously through a few of my buddies. But talked to a buddy of mine, was up on Winnie this week, did great. he sort of had that same advice that I was giving you earlier in the podcast, jigging minnow, jigging fathead, just sort of popping it and just letting it sit on the bottom. And he said even just dragging it, letting it sit on the bottom. The problem with Lake Winnebagoche right now, and a lot of lakes that we're seeing, is there's a lot of dead vegetation on the bottom. Winnie has starry stonewort. If you're unfamiliar with that, it's another invasive species, unfortunately, but it sort of coats the bottom with this slimy, black, grassy, mossy weed type of thing. When it dies off, you'll see it kind of has fingers to it. But the starry stonewort there's a lot of it. It's sort of on the south end. I noticed it on the west side, a lot of these shallow water shelves. You can get away with it by snap jigging or snap jigging plastics, but when you're dragging, sometimes it becomes problematic. And so, but he was saying, like, throwing your jig out there, letting it sit on the bottom, lifting it up, letting it sit on the bottom, and sort of fishing a little bit slower. He said, as the afternoons warmed up, though, switching to a plastic. You know, we've talked about the Crush City jerk shads. We've talked about the Crush City Mayor, which is the paddle tail. This time of year, I almost exclusively go back to the paddle tails, that slower fall on the paddle tail. And when I lift it and fall, it's sort of a shorter little pop rather than, really cracking that bait like you do earlier in the season, let's say earlier in the fall or in the spring or early summer. This is more of just a lift and let it fall and let it sit there. Lift and let it fall and let it sit there. Another bait that's absolutely deadly along those same categories would be a hair jig. And that can be used in those same scents. So Winnebagoche is on fire. Mille Lacs is on fire. That jig bite is really good right now. That nighttime trolling bite. If you are going to troll at night, if you want to shift, my recommendation for baits has always been like a Husky Jerk, an HJ12. So Husky Jerk 12. Trolling those at 1.2 miles an hour, 1.4, 1.5 at the top end, but sort of that 1 to 1.5 miles an hour, just sort of slow rolling those baits back and forth. Those baits are tried and true. If you've never trolled on Mille Lacs Lake and you're new to it and you don't deer hunt and you want to take advantage of this full moon and you're listening to this podcast right now, go out and buy some Husky Jerks, the size 12. There's a couple colors. Obviously, your real bright colors, your fire tigers, your gold perch, your bright, even UV green, UV pinks, those really bright white color works good out there. And then also the stark contrast to that, the blue chromes, the black chromes. The tulipies are coming in. They're in right now. They're in the shallows. And so anything that's colored like a tulipy, that black chrome is always a good one. Even just the clear or the ghost color works great. And then, of course, the blue chrome is another great color. So Winnebagoche, Mille Lacs, great jig bites. Don't be afraid to use plastics if you can't find minnows, and don't be afraid to use hair jigs as well. Leech Lake, kind of the same thing. Jigging, although it seems like surface temps have really cooled down. It always, for me, and maybe it's just me, but it seems like when surface temperatures get below like 47, 46, 47, that Leech Lake bite slows down dramatically, except right in the evening. You can go out in the evening and pound fish, like bang, 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 bang. I've had days where guide trips where I was out there at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning and it was like watching paint dry. But then as soon as that like 2, 3 o'clock hour rolled around, those fish start to feed. It was like they all hit a light switch and they were on. So if you deer hunt up in that area and you're bringing the boat, a lot of people do. I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of people bring their boats or they have a cabin that they stay at and they deer hunt maybe state land around there or whatever. If you're doing some fishing, I would throw in some jigs. I would throw in some jig rods, some hair jigs, some plastics, and try to stop at as many bait shops as you can on the way up until you can get minnows, because a lot of bait shops are closed down this time of year, or they just don't have a great minnow supply because they don't want to carry it into winter. If you can find some small sucker minnows, more power to you. If you can find some shiners, even better. But I typically like the smaller shiners. So either large fatheads, rainbows, small sucker minnows, small shiner minnows. Those are all great. If you can find them, more power to you. I love live bait this time of year for walleyes. especially if you get these big cold front days where it's a real dragging bite or you're just barely moving that minnow. And other lakes too that I fish, I should mention is the rigging bite. I talk a lot about jigging on this, but rigging chubs, if you could get a chub, if you can rig a rainbow, a shiner minnow, just nose hooking those with a real small hook. Light pound test. I like to use a fluorocarbon 4 6-pound test leaders, but rigs work fantastic this time of year. That's another bait that you could pull right in front of fish's face, whether you're using forward facing sonar or not, and just let it sit there, let the minnow do its thing. And a lot of times those fish can't resist it. Interesting to note along those lines is drop shotting. Pinning those big minnows on a drop shot sometimes this time of year, just straight up and down, works great for walleyes and also for crappies. I was talking a lot about jig wraps, horizontal type of jigs. If you can pinpoint those fish at their depth with the drop shot and just hold it there and let them hit a live minnow, a lot of times they can't resist it. So those are some tips for you if you're trying to squeeze in some last minute open water. I know a ton of people out there that are probably shaking their head and being like, I put the boat away 2 months ago. But then there's a lot of others that are like, I can't believe Tony put his boat away already. There's tons of fishing left. And that may be the truth. But for me, because I like to squeeze it all in between the hunting, the fishing, and then, of course, gearing up for ice and getting all my stuff organized for ice fishing, it's coming to an end. And I like the season changes. That's why I love where I live in Minnesota. I love northern Minnesota this time of year. I can hunt, I can fish, I can do my projects, I can be back in the woods, I can deer hunt, I can grouse hunt, I can run out to the Dakotas and do a little pheasant hunting, fishing. And so a lot to do this time of year, but I love it. I wish, and I know I sound like a broken record on this podcast, but I wish this time of year would last another month. That would just be incredible. I know my dog would like it too. So, hey, stay tuned. We're going to take one more break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about some ice product, and then, of course, my trip to South Dakota as we wrap it up this week on the Dialed In Angling podcast. Stay tuned.
Runnings Home, Farm, and Outdoor stores are celebrating 78 years, serving 90 local communities across the Upper Midwest, the Northeast, and America's Heartland. Runnings has everything you and your family need for your home, on the farm, and in the outdoors. Lawn and garden, hardware, farm and ranch supplies, sporting goods, housewares, snacks, and everything for your pets. Go to runnings.com to find one of the 90 locations near you, or shop online anytime at runnings.com. Runnings, your home, farm, and outdoor store.
Okay, so for the final segment of the Dialed In Angling podcast this week, we are going to talk a little bit of ice fishing destinations. For a lot of people, ice fishing starts, whenever they're comfortable getting on the ice. And, I would say one thing, if you're in the market for some products this year, one, obviously we talked last week about the Maven auger. That's going to be a game changer for a lot of people because it's a quick, light, super fast auger that drills a ton of holes with the 40V platform. That's going to be kind of on your list. If you're looking for new augers, that's going to be an item that's going to sell out quickly. Another one is getting your float suit out. If you don't have a float suit, highly recommend it for anyone, for kids. It's a great gift to get someone if they're an avid angler, regardless of brand. Obviously, I'm a Strike Master guy, but having that float suit is so key. I just can't imagine stepping foot on the ice this year without some sort of flotation system. It's just not in the cards, especially as I see people on Facebook and on Instagram this week where they're looking for ice in northern Canada. They're looking for ice out in the mountains. You got to have a float suit on, and you got to do it correctly. Another thing that goes right along with the float suit, I don't care if you got the float suit on or not, you've got to have the picks. Okay, the picks that go around your neck is a must. You don't want to be stuck out there where you can float, but you can't get out of the ice, especially on ice where you don't have snow. This time of year, early ice, when we start getting ice and it's just like that sort of that skim ice. And let's say you have 3, 4, 5, 6 inches of ice, but no snow on top. It warms up a little bit and it's extremely slippery. If you don't have those picks to get out, it's extremely hard to pop yourself up onto that ice sheet. And so having those picks around your neck is peace of mind. You should have them on all year. I wear mine all the time. Rapala has a nice set that kind of clicks together. You don't even know they're there. You can tuck them in. I usually tuck them in inside my jacket a little bit. They're comfortable to wear. You don't even notice they're on, but I put those around my neck all the time. And then, of course, a bar, like a spud bar, a pick, something you can throw out front so you know that every inch of ice you're stepping on is safe. And now I'm not the first person to step foot on the ice. I'm really not. I'm usually a little more cautious than that. I'm not saying that the guys that are going out there right away are taking risks, because most of them are very good anglers. They know exactly what they're doing on the ice. They know they've been in those situations before, but you've got to take precautions. You've got to use a spud bar. You've got to use your float suit. You've got to have the picks on. Those are 3 musts. So before you go out and buy any other piece of equipment, if you don't have those 3 items and you plan on fishing early ice or any bit of ice at all, you should have those 3 items. Those are a must in my book, is the float suit, the picks, and the spud bar. And then beyond that, you can start adding the augers, the otter shelters, the pull behind sleds. You know, I've got a lot of cool fishing stuff. I like having my early ice stuff that I get ready this time of year, my small sport sleds from Otter. I've got that loaded down with, you know, my spud bar, my forward-facing sonar units, my Markham units, my whatever I bring out there, my tackle systems. I've got that stuff ready to go. And again, I'm not the first one. I don't want to be the first one out there on an inch or 2 of ice. But once we start getting, you know, that 4 inches of ice, I'm doing it safely. And, you know, I've been on ice my entire life. And, you know, I know the argument out there among some anglers where they're like, you send the wrong message when you tell kids they should get out there early. No, I'm not. Early ice, you should be with adults. You should be in a buddy system. You should not go out there by yourself. You should work as a tandem and together, or even with multiple people, where you have multiple spud bars going, multiple people drilling, multiple people checking ice conditions, and you have ropes with you with a throwable and all of that stuff to make it safe. I've never, knock on wood, I have never personally gone through the ice other than late in the spring where I broke through the landing a little bit, but it was up to my knees or waist. It was more of an inconvenience or anything. I knew the ice was getting soft at shore, but you know, the rest of the ice was safe. I've never broke through the ice, knock on wood. I'm always very safe about checking every inch of ice. I hope I never go through the ice, but I always have these safety precautions in place. I always have my suit on. I've always had my picks. I always have a spud bar. I always have a rope with the throwable so that we're good to go. Any of those early ice conditions, when I'm safe like that, yes, I don't mind taking my son out or taking his friends out. Now, they're jacked up to ice fish, so the next time they want to go out on the ice in those early conditions, I'm always throwing caution to it. Like, hey, guys, let me go check it out first for you. Even though my son's a senior in high school now, I'm still one to go out there and check. I've had it on multiple occasions where I dropped everything that evening because my son wanted to go out early ice with his buddies the next day to walleye fish at the crack of dawn. And so we drove over to the lake he wanted to fish, and we checked ice together. That's just a safe way to do it. And even though you checked it the day before, let's say you go out the next day, you still have to use those same procedures when you get out there. So when I'm seeing people ice fish already this time of year, looking for ice up in the mountains, looking at ice in Canada, great. I think that's awesome. That's cool. If they're ice enthusiasts like me, that's super cool. They're doing that. However, I know that those anglers are doing it with 100% caution in mind, and they're checking every inch of ice. And I'm guessing they're not on 1 inch of ice, but you know, you don't know. If you are seeing people like that, obviously you got to use the best discretion you can. I personally need a little bit more than that. I'd like to see, you know, kind of that 4 inch range or more, to have what I would consider walkable, fishable ice. That gives you a little breathing room. Also, you have to watch the weather. Just like I was talking earlier in the podcast about watching the weather. These afternoons warm up. This sun still has a ton of power as we get in towards late November, early December. And so just using caution that if it's going to warm up and it's black ice and that sun's going to come out, it's going to make that ice a lot weaker than it was in the morning when it tightened up. Same thing can be said in the spring when you're going out on ice in March or early April. I've seen it where it's been super tight in the morning, in the teens overnight. And then about 10, 11 o'clock, it starts to warm up 40s, 50 degrees. That's when, as anglers, you start to say, okay, it's time to start making our way towards shore, checking every inch of ice on our way out and just being safe about it. And if you are, like me, knock on wood, I have not had to experience going through the ice, and it can be an absolutely safe sport. So if you're going out there shopping this fall, you should have those items on your list. If you have a kid that's interested in ice fishing, those are great things to have that they can have the rest of their life, especially the picks, the spud bars. And then, of course, there's all sorts of new gadgets and tackle out there. I'm starting to geek up for ice fishing just as much as I am, for hunting and putting some closure to this open water season. I love the season changes. Again, I'll say it time after time. Like, my wife knows, like, once hunting season hits, there's sort of this switch that goes off, and then I'm in hunting mode for a few weeks, but then it's that fast transition, usually right over to ice. And I hope we get that, because it looks like we're setting up for a really good ice season like we saw last year. At least November indicate that. December looks like it's on track. So we'll see if Mother Nature cooperates. So, hey, you're going to want to stay tuned to the podcast next week, because like I said, I'm going to be out fishing with Marcus Quam, good buddy of mine. We'll have full details. I'm going to have him jump on the podcast. I want to catch up with him anyway, as far as how the rest of his season went after we talked to him this summer. Last time we chatted with him on the podcast, he was heading up to Devil's Lake to fish a tournament. We talked a little bit about fishing in South Dakota and North Dakota at that time frame. I want to catch back up with him and see how the rest of his guiding season went. I know he's catching them. I know he's killing pheasants right now. So if I have jealousy and envy or FOMO right now, it's of Marcus Quam being out there, being able to shoot pheasants, catch giant walleyes. I can't wait to experience it next week. We'll talk about it on the podcast. November is going to go by quickly. Make sure you're going out, taking advantage of these warm days, hitting the water, hitting the woods on these evenings where it's overcast, low wind. Try to shoot a buck with your bow. Good luck to everybody in firearms season, at least for the Minnesota firearms season here coming up this week. Good luck to everybody out there tuning in. Of course, next week we'll have full details on my trip to South Dakota. So this has been the Dialed In Angling Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Good luck fishing, and we'll see you on the water.